rude people on there. So I hope you'll check that out. And of course, my cat is now crawling on my shoulder. They just love when I do Zoom meetings. um, so a little bit about myself. I've been a full-time photographer for about 8 years, and it started as a hobby for me that was really quickly blossomed. And in the early days, I really got into night photography. And this was just in the beginning when digital cameras were just starting to get good enough to capture the night sky. And I spent all of my time learning how to be a better night photographer, and I really excelled quickly. And I kind of became internet famous after taking an image of the Perseids meteor shower. And from then on, I was in high demand to teach workshops on night photography. So I decided to give it a go, and I was immediately successful despite not knowing what the heck I was doing at the time. But then I wrote a book on night photography, which was also very successful. And after that, I became a little burnout on night photography, and I decided to refocus my attention on landscape photography. So I spent several years refining my techniques, and while I enjoyed this, I kind of became tired of that too, and I've kind of refocused on primarily intimate landscapes. So what you're going to see tonight is a lot of those intimate type landscapes that are um, more smaller scenes and more calming and soothing in a way. Kind of tell more of a story about the landscape rather than some grand landscape. And I love the stories that can be told with these smaller scenes, but it can be hard to see these type of scenes. It took a long time to develop my eye. And today I want to show you techniques that can help you develop your eye in the same way that I did. And my primary tool for changing the way that I see was through contemplative photography. And before we get started, I just want to say that you should take the advice presented here with a grain of salt. In fact, you should take all advice towards your photography with a grain of salt. Ultimately, it's your decision on how you approach your art. We're all unique individuals on our own paths, and what works for me may not work for you. So I would advise you to take away the things that resonate with you and leave the rest. And with that said, I would also encourage you to have a beginner's mind. I'm sure many of you are quite advanced photographers, and you may feel like you have little left to learn. But I would ask you to take a step back from that and envision yourself approaching photography for the very first time. A beginner's mind is open, eager, and lacks preconceptions, no matter how skilled you are. So if you come into this thinking that you cannot learn anything, then you've already set yourself up to do exactly that. So with that out of the way, let's get into this. I'm sure for many of you, contemplative photography is a new concept. And I assure you that if you keep an open mind, the concepts that I'll be talking about have the potential to change your photography forever. And I know that it did for me. So I started my journey into contemplative photography over 5 years ago. And it not only transformed the way that I photograph, but also how I see the world. I look at everything differently now, and I notice beauty all around me. So contemplative photography is about creating something that's personal and meaningful to you. It's about opening your mind to seeing what you find personally interesting. It's about noticing moments that we normally ignore. So I've been photographing about 12 years, which I know is a relatively short time. But in that time, I feel like I've grown by leaps and bounds. I used to be all about the grand landscape. I chased the epic light and the iconic locations for most of that time. And it's only recently that I've slowed down and taken a different approach to my photography. Now, the point of this presentation is not to make you feel bad about photographing icons or chasing dramatic weather. I still do these things myself, and I have fun doing it. The difference is those images don't give me deep creative satisfaction. They leave me feeling a bit empty inside, versus when I create a thoughtful, intimate scene, it's something I own, which gives me fulfillment because a little part of myself was put on display in the image. So back to the subject of what contemplative photography is. This is the definition of contemplate, which sums it up on a surface level of what I'll be encouraging you to do here today, which is to slow down and pay attention to the details. But contemplative photography goes to a deeper level by opening yourself up to seeing flashes of your psyche. It's an innate intelligence inside each of us based upon our life experiences, a well of creativity waiting to be released. We can find this creativity by letting go of the constant barrage of mental activity that clouds our natural insight and awareness. So another way to look at it is meditation with a camera. So meditation is training the mind to stop being easily distracted and instead be more focused in the present moment. Now, if you're not familiar with meditation, I know that it might conjure up images like this.
David?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Sandy. At least on my screen, I'm not seeing you advance through through slides. So
mine went black.
Huh. Okay. Let me try starting over the share. It's the first time that's happened.
Yeah, for some of us though, it's been working fine.
Huh. Okay.
Working fine for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not having any trouble.
I was fine.
All right. How's that look?
No, I don't see anything.
Black.
It just says you started sharing and it hasn't come through yet.
Still starting sharing, yeah. But you were fine for us,
Yeah.
David.
It was fine, but now it's like this, and I have that little time signal.
I'm so sorry.
I
But it
was
was
fine.
not,
Now I see a black screen.
Yeah, it's all black.
Huh. Let me try approaching it differently. Let's see. Can you see that now?
no.
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 Nope,
You, Tom?
nope, can't see it. Nothing.
Nope, just David Kingham
Can't
with
see
the
it.
little rotating thing.
Sure.
Andy, you threw a wrench in the gear.
You said that others couldn't, and now I can't.
Okay. Let me jump out of the meeting and I'll come
Yeah.
back and see if that
Okay.
helps.
Yes, I think it will. Thank you. So was there anybody else that had trouble when I jumped in and said the slides were not advancing?
Yes,
Actually, yeah, because it
Yeah.
wasn't advanced.
right before it went to contemplative, the definition of contemplative, that's when I lost everything.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Plus, I lost them twice where he just froze on the screen.
Everything was fine for us here.
Interesting.
It was fine for me too, until Sandy made the announcement.
Well, there's a little screen.
There we go.
Well,
Hey,
What's up,
meditation.
seeing
Oh,
some,
Mike. Oh, Mike Washington, you're here.
Listen's good. I can see it now.
Likewise.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay, microphone's off. Thank you.
All right. So I will not be talking about New Age spiritual awakenings, transcendence, your third eye, etc. I will, however, be talking about some concepts that do have a tinge of hippie to them if you've never heard them before. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I know it might scare some people off, and I want to keep this relatable for everyone. So bear with me a little bit. Just know that I won't be going off the deep end, I promise. So one form of meditation is mindfulness. But what does that really mean? Mindfulness is the ability to be present in the here and now, fully engaged with whatever we're doing in the moment. Which means not thinking about the past or the future, only right now. Our minds are typically consumed by thoughts of either the future, like the next project you have to work on, what you're going to eat tonight, or we think about the past. This may be insecurities about how others may be viewing us, worry, doubt, thinking that we're not good enough photographers. When you learn to manage these thoughts, you'll be open to seeing what's around you in a different way. It's about being aware of everything around us, the sounds, the smells, the sensations, the light, the shadows, the movement, the textures, the tiny details, being open and aware to everything. Now, why is it that managing these thoughts helps us to see creatively? It all starts in the part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is essentially your filter to the world around you. Without it, you would cease to function. You would be overwhelmed by all the constant inputs coming into your brain. So just imagine walking around your neighborhood. What do you notice? Do you notice the people walking, what they're talking about, what they're wearing, what they smell like? Do you notice the trees rustling in the wind? Do you notice each individual leaf? What about each little vein in that leaf and the patterns that it creates? Do you notice the bark of the tree, its color, its texture, its smell? Do you notice the plane flying overhead or the sun hitting your left arm and the sensation that it creates? I could go on and on and on. The point is that there are endless inputs coming into all of our senses constantly. And what our brain actually processes is determined by this filter. So to demonstrate how this filter works, I'll ask you to watch a little video and take a little test with me.
David,
Yep.
so sorry. Yeah,
No problem.
it's not advancing.
Really?
We're stuck on managing your day-to-day thoughts.
Huh.
Mike Washington, I know you're here. He's our tech guru.
Yeah.
I do not have an answer for this.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sandy, do you think it has to do with like that chat thing?
I don't think so.
Maybe we nixed out the how to share screen with everybody.
Yeah, put it back to where it was. Okay.
David, can I ask you to basically, instead of sharing your PowerPoint app,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
share-
I'll try desktop.
put it on your desktop and share the desktop.
See, Mike, see?
Just a second.
I knew you'd have an answer.
It may not
Maybe I'll-
necessarily be the right one, but it's worth trying. It worked before.
Can you see that?
I got black.
No,
I've got David Kingham has started sharing screen.
Yeah, whatever screen you're sharing should have a nice green ring around the outside of it, meaning that the screen is being shared.
Yeah, it actually doesn't, which is unusual. Let me try
What if
flipping
you
this
made
around.
Are you using multiple monitors or a single monitor?
Yeah, I'm using two. Let me flip them around and see if that
we're
helps.
sharing for a moment?
Sorry about this, guys. I've done 3 of these this week and never had any problems.
and we practiced today, so.
Yeah.
Well, we're in the black hole of Baltimore.
And the president's on television. Maybe he's nixed out everything.
Yeah, generally, whatever your screen, you can either share the whatever screen you're at.
Yeah.
Whichever monitor, just share the monitor or share the app. And if the app's not working, I usually recommend just sharing the whole screen.
Yeah.
But you should have a nice big green border around whatever it is you're sharing.
Yeah, I know that usually shows up and it's not. That's bizarre. Well, that's frustrating.
Do you think you need to go out and come back in again?
Your camera's coming in fine. I'm just not getting the screen.
Right.
Could you give the deck to Sandy or Michael and then just have them advance the slides?
There you go. You got a slide. You had it up for a moment there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Didn't look like it was
Leaves
working.
rustling.
Yeah, there it is. It's up now.
Leaves rustling.
There it is. There it is.
Get your PowerPoint slide up now. Okay, you just advanced it. Okay, now you're showing your notes page.
Oh, jeez.
Well, if you have your one screen, you have your main screen up on one monitor and your notes page on the other monitor, share the monitor that has your main screen on it. There
Yeah.
you go. You have it up now.
Or you can click on top of your presentation notes and flip the screen so that we don't see your notes, but
Okay.
we will see the other monitor.
Can you see that?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's a nice big
Okay.
screen.
And you see the,
Starting with leaves rustling, prefrontal cortex. There we go.
Prefrontal cortex.
okay. This is what you missed.
Okay. Go on mute.
Okay. All right. Hopefully the video will come through. So
Looks
here's a
great
little
on the
test.
iPad.
Okay, you guys, this is great.
All right. It's a little test for you. Pay close attention here. So I want you to count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. All right. How many did you guys get?
11.
14.
I got 13.
You got
13.
15, you're right.
Yeah,
But
I got 15.
Did you notice the gorilla?
Yeah.
Yes, he had white teeth.
So what we've witnessed here is the prefrontal cortex in action. About 50% of the people who have not seen this before don't see the gorilla. So it's great at keeping us focused on tasks and keeping us alive, but it's really terrible for creativity. When we have thoughts about tasks, stressors, worries, doubts, it activates the prefrontal cortex and shuts down our creativity. Hopefully you guys can see the comic here. So we're trained to not be creative from a young age. Public schooling was created to make good worker bees. They want you to show up on time, do what you're told, study, memorize to pass that test, turn on that prefrontal cortex and get your task done. And this was further drilled into our psyche as we got into the workforce. We must reprogram our brain to get out of this purely analytical mindset. And this is where meditation comes into play. Now, you don't have to be sitting on the ledge of a cliff with glowing light below you and sitting in the lotus position to meditate. Meditation can look different for everyone. For me, it's just wandering around quietly with my camera. What you do need to be aware of is your thoughts and surroundings so that you can be present in the moment. And through mindful awareness, we're able to quiet the day-to-day thoughts and just enough to allow these non-essential inputs to come through the filter. And we begin to notice the world around us. Now, a powerful but simple acronym to remind us of this is GAP. GAP is a technique to help clear your mind when you feel cluttered and overwhelmed with life in general. You can use this when you go out photographing or any other time to help calm your mind so that you're open to seeing. So I want you to take a little trip with me. Let's imagine that you have arrived at your favorite photography location. So the first step in GAP is to become grounded. Sit down on a bench, a rock, a log, on the ground, or just stand still, whatever's most comfortable. Now sit comfortable and relaxed and become aware of your body. Focus attention on what you're sitting on and the sensation of your body pressing against that, and let your weight just settle into the earth. And then say to yourself, grounded. Now it's time to make yourself aware. Close your eyes and focus on your hearing. Notice any sounds that are occurring, or just listen to the silence. Whatever you hear, put a label to it. Birds chirping, river flowing, leaves rustling. Now move your attention to your nose. What do you smell? The flowers, the trees. Put another label to that. And then pay attention to your skin. What do you feel? A light breeze? The sun warming your skin, or cold, crisp air? Put a label to it. Then open your eyes and let your attention be brought to a leaf, a flower, a tree. See it as if it was the first time you've ever seen it. Contemplate it. Notice every little minute detail, and then say to yourself, aware. And then finally, just make yourself present in the current moment. So place your hand over your chest where your heart is, and just acknowledge that you're here in this place now, living, breathing, and existing. And then just say to yourself, present. When you become grounded and aware in the present moment, you begin to find clarity and start noticing things that have always been there, but your preoccupied mind was filtering them out. This practice has completely changed my photography for the better. So you're bound to have a flurry of thoughts when you begin this practice. Most people do not like to sit still and be alone with their thoughts. It can bring on a wave of anxiety over thoughts about unfinished projects, emotions from past trauma that haven't been acknowledged, fears, doubts. It can be really scary for some people. And I found that I can calm my mind by just saying to myself thoughts over and over and over when these come pouring in. And it helps to just refocus my attention on the present and quiet those thoughts. It can also be helpful to just focus on your breathing. Now, contemplation can be defined as careful observation. Observing or seeing is the key here, not looking. This is not an active pursuit where we're seeking something out. Rather, we're open to just seeing what catches our eye. And it may be something extraordinary that makes us stop in awe, or it may be subtle, just a tiny flicker of something that you find interesting. So we're normally consumed by our thoughts or emotions. It is those moments in between our thoughts and emotions where we have gaps in perception, or what is called a flash of perception. So most of you have experienced this gap in perception when you wake up from a nap. And for a moment, you don't know where you're at. And for that moment, everything's really vivid, and you notice every detail in the room while you're trying to figure this out. It normally takes something really extraordinary to notice these gaps throughout the day. It may be a moment of exceptional beauty, like an incredible sunset, or something terrible, like a car accident or a loss of a loved one. Something that makes you stop and just distorts your reality for a moment. And you look at these things differently. Rather than relying on those moments, we can instead choose to notice these gaps through practice. So take this moment, for example. I was wandering around in this canyon, not actively looking for anything. Instead, I was open to seeing something that caught my eye, which made me stop. The light hitting the trees lasted only a mere seconds. This was my flash of perception. Rather than actively looking, I was open to seeing and was able to catch this fleeting moment. And I'll talk more about this in images in a second. Or it could be noticing these leaves touching in soft embrace. A tiny detail I would have never noticed if I had not slowed down to pay attention to the details. There were thousands of leaves around me, but I noticed this little moment. Or maybe these leaves reflecting in some slightly disturbed water. Just imagine how easy it would be to miss this if your awareness or of your surroundings is not heightened to an extreme level. Or noticing this subtle scene amongst the vast forest of colorful trees. This patch of trees was across the valley and very easy to miss, but they caught my eye with the sweeping curves and the beautiful colors in the grasses. Or this peaceful scene in a desert canyon. There was no spectacular, iconic scene in this canyon. Here you have to work for it and notice the subtle details like the trees reflected in the water. So this is a very abstract image that was created in some unnamed canyon in Moab, Utah. It's a really pretty canyon, but it's also kind of disgusting at the same time. It has this shallow river that's mostly standing water with this black, stinky mud, and it's just generally gross to walk through. But the cool thing about this canyon is the oils that develop on top of the water. We're not really sure where these oils come from, but I think it's some natural petroleum coming up through the ground. And either way, it's kind of disgusting and not a place a normal person would want to spend their day, but we photographers can be a bit weird. So we had been photographing the oils for hours and we were starting to get a bit tired. So we were working our way back to the car, photographing a bit here and there, but I had mostly finished for the day. And my partner Jennifer was in front of me walking through the water and the oil, which was breaking up into small fragments. And because I was still open to seeing what was around me, despite my tiredness, I happened to notice a small area where the water was causing the broken oil to swirl. So I quickly set up and started firing away with a longer shutter speed. I didn't know quite what to expect, but I was pleasantly surprised seeing the first images pop up. Now, if I didn't have my mind open to seeing something new, I would have never noticed this. Most of the day, I was focused on finding really pristine oil, and I didn't pay attention to what we had walked through. But thankfully, at the end of the day, I opened up my awareness to truly see what was around me, and this ended up being my favorite image of the day. And here we have some other plant oils in a different but popular canyon that others walk by without any thought. Most people would never notice this was even there. So unless you see this on an overcast day, it's almost impossible to see unless you stand directly over it and shade it with your body. So when you slow down and pay attention, you can see another surreal world that you didn't even know existed before. So we have our eyes and mind open to see now. But what is it that we're looking for? And ultimately, this is a decision for your mind's unique view of the world to answer. So I'm going to give you some general ideas of what you might be interested in, but I don't want this to be prescriptive in any way. Remember to be open to what interests you. And remember that you're not looking for these things specifically, but you're open to seeing them, and these are only ideas to fill your head with. So to help you see, it's useful to break down a scene to its simple elements and stop thinking about a photo in a literal sense. When you're thinking too literally, you again turn on that prefrontal cortex because you're thinking about it as a literal object rather than a design element. So let's start with one of the most basic elements and what largely defines photography, which is a medium that records light. What I'm referring to specifically is unique moments of light. You can photograph in any light. There is no bad light, but there are unique qualities of light that can make more interesting images, and you should be open to seeing these moments. So this was in the San Juan Mountains in southern Colorado during peak fall color. Yet there's nothing about this scene that screams fall colors. There's a little bit of color in the tundra, but that's certainly not what you think of with fall colors. The spot that we were at, it's this incredible grand vista. There's dramatic mountains all around you, and the hillsides are just covered in vibrant yellow aspen trees. But the thing about this day that it was very stormy, windy, and mostly gray. The grand vista was not really interesting. But rather than giving up, I refocused my attention. I asked myself what interesting things were happening around me. I then noticed that there was light peeking through the clouds, which occasionally spotlighted areas of the hillside. So I got out my telephoto lens and started paying attention to what was happening with the light, which is something I often watch for and try to make the light the subject of the image. And I knew this image was going to be all about that beautiful splash of light. The mountain and the hillsides were actually just secondary. So back to this image. Again, I was wandering around at a canyon in Zion National Park, and I did not visualize this image. I had no preconceptions of what I was going to see or photograph this day. I was simply present, aware, and enjoying my surroundings. I had my camera out and all my settings ready to go and on the tripod. So it's important to have everything ready so that technical issues do not get in the way of execution. Once you have to think about what settings you should use, you're again reactivating that prefrontal cortex and shutting down creativity. So when I arrived at this location, most of the trees were in full harsh light. But as the day progressed, I noticed that some of the trees were catching just a little bit of last light as in the canyon as they began to go into shade. Then that flash happened. I saw these two trees being backlit by the sun with the canyon walls in shadow, and I knew that I had to make an image quickly. So I set my tripod up, quickly composed, and fired away. And within seconds, the light was gone. So if I was fumbling with my settings, or I didn't have my tripod out already, or not being open to seeing this flash of perception, I could not have created this image. And here was another moment of light that lasted a bit longer, but could have easily been missed. And this was actually noticed by Jennifer because I was driving at the time, so I couldn't be aware to or be open to seeing, but thankfully she was. And she noticed these trees were being lit, so we stopped and captured this moment when the leaves were backlit and they seemed to be glowing against the dark background behind them. And the hillside behind the trees was actually blocking most of the sun and was only allowing this beam of light on the tree in the early morning. And shortly after this, the trees in the background were lit as well, which was not nearly as compelling as this. And I noticed this fleeting moment in Yellowstone fairly recently. The perfect moment of dappled light hitting the steam and lighting up only certain areas of the basin. And it was hard not to be distracted by the mountains in the background, which had just gotten some fresh snow, and there was low clouds rolling through the valley. And believe me, I took those photos of the grand scene before I took this. It's really hard to not be distracted by the stunning beauty that nature can create, especially with interesting weather. But those photos still felt a little bit like snapshots to me, something that any tourist could take with their iPhone. This is unique and better expresses my vision. Now, on this day, I was wandering aimlessly on a playa in Death Valley, and there were some interesting mud patterns all over the playa. But rather than getting stuck in one spot, I forced myself to wander and discover new things. The sun was out, so it was kind of hard to see the patterns, but I came across this interesting section of ripples that I thought could make a really nice subject. But I wasn't completely inspired just yet. And then the sun began to dip below the mountain range, and a flash happened. As that low light raked across those mud ripples, the full dimensionality of the scene was revealed. Suddenly, it had depth and dimension. And once again, I had mere seconds to compose and fire off a few shots before the sun dipped below the mountain completely, and I was in the shade again with the flat landscape. So most people photograph sunset and then immediately leave once the sun goes down. I would implore you to stay much longer. This was taken about 20 minutes after sunset. So there are many different types of light when you start opening your mind and paying attention. Dinner can wait. Spend some more time in the landscape and watch how the light changes. Pay attention to how harsh or soft the light is, how dark or light the shadows are. Twilight on a clear day is one of my favorite times to photograph because the shadows are softened and the colors take on a completely different hue. Now here, I was again wandering on a playa in Death Valley, which I like to do a lot. And this was in harsh afternoon light. I thought that I was only scouting for something to photograph later when the sun went down. But because I had trained my brain to see that flash, I noticed this. So there was a small bush that sat next to this patch of mud that blocked most of the light and only let a little bit of dappled light through its branches. And this again transformed the bleak landscape into something with depth and emotion. So another element to look out for is, of course, is contrast. Now, contrast can come in many different forms, so I'll show you some different examples of this. The most obvious contrast, which most people are familiar with, is the contrast between dark and light. Creating black and white images mid-morning or mid-afternoon is a great way to show off this contrast. The deep, dark shadows give context to this brightly lit sand dune, revealing their depth and beautiful curves. And this is the same type of contrast between darkness and light or luminosity, but in a different context or style. In this case, the leaves were backlit brilliantly while the background was in dark shadow, which accentuates the leaves. Now, if the background had also been lit, then the leaves wouldn't glow so brilliantly, or if the light was coming from behind me, they'd be really flat. So start really paying attention to these transitions between dark and light to notice these moments. So this is an example of luminosity contrast, like I've been talking about, but between the light and the dark areas, with light hitting the dune and the dark background, but it also has color contrast. So note that you have the warm sand dune where the light was hitting, contrasted against the mountain in the background, which has this lovely blue hue to it. Now, when you really start to pay attention to colors, you'll start to notice that areas in shadow typically have a blue cast to them. Our eye tends to correct this, so you may have never noticed it before, but when you really become attuned to it, you can start to see it clearly and use it to your advantage. Now here we have another example of color contrast. The clouds or virga were being lit by the warm light of sunset, while the mountains in the background were not getting any light, which created a nice contrast between warm and cool again. So the next time you go outside, pay close attention to the colors in shadow versus those in light. And over time, you'll start to see blue shadows everywhere you go. And you can also have a simple color contrast. Here we have the yellow contrasting against the greens and reds, which really helps to give this some depth and really nice layers as well. Now in this image, we have color contrast, luminosity contrast, and texture contrast. The light plant against the dark rock is really dramatic, combined with the color contrast of the green against black really helps to make it pop out. But we also have texture contrast here. The soft, delicate plant contrasted against the harsh, sharp lava rock gives context of the harsh environment that this plant lives in and tells a much better story. And here again, textural contrast shows the delicate ephemeral flowers growing out of the hard, seemingly unchanging rock, which tells a wonderful story of this place and its elements. And then combine this with the light on the peak contrasting with the shadowed foreground, and you have a really powerful image. So another element to keep your eyes open for are shapes. This is where you really stop thinking in a literal sense. So I want you to start ignoring the details and think only about the pleasing shapes. So it can be useful to actually squint your eyes when evaluating a scene, or take off your glasses, or to even defocus your lens temporarily and look through the viewfinder to take away the detail. So I do this often when composing to distill the scene into its most basic elements. Sometimes the details can be a distraction from what's most important. So here we have a simple yet powerful S-curve. Now this image is distilled down to its most simple elements of the curves and some texture on the sand dune. You might not have even known this was a sand dune if I didn't tell you. What the subject actually is not important. The design elements are what matters. The curves, the textures, and the contrast. Now here we have some swirling sea foam. But was I thinking about how much I love sea foam? No, I'm not a lover of sea foam. I was thinking about the lovely swirling pattern and how it looked like a pinwheel galaxy to me. So metaphors are useful to tell a different story. And as the great Minor White said, one should not only photograph things for what they are, but for what else they are. Try to think in metaphors and see if your vision changes. And here the ring shape of the corn lilies encircled this flower perfectly. The corn lilies or the flower were not particularly interesting on their own. So this is not a portrait of them as a subject, it's a photograph of the shapes and their placement forming this ring. Now, this is one of my favorite images, a simple sand pattern in a windstorm. The conditions were absolutely miserable, but I was able to push aside my feelings of discomfort to keep my mind open to seeing this interesting shape that would be easy to walk right by if I was only on a mission to capture the epic scene. The patterns are another element to watch out for. I'll admit that I struggle seeing patterns, and it's something that I need to work on. But you want to look for repeating elements that create a pleasing pattern. Most mud cracks are really chaotic. So this pattern stopped me in my tracks because it looked like it was almost perfectly mirrored. And if it wasn't for the repeating patterns in this mud, it wouldn't be an interesting photograph. There's no interesting light. There's only a little bit of contrast between the white and brown, but the pattern is really what completes it. Now, this mud was completely chaotic. I struggled to find a good composition until I stopped looking at it literally and paid attention purely on the patterns. Then I was able to see this radiating pattern. Now, this is a great example of mud that you could easily confuse for ice. And this is exactly what I was going for. The scalloped edges at just the right angle gave this the appearance of ice. Again, I wasn't being too literal by photographing mud. I was photographing what looked like ice patterns. And this pattern reminded me of a jigsaw puzzle. Again, the subject isn't the mud itself, it's the pattern. Now, another powerful element to look for is layers. This is not just a photograph of sand dunes. It's a story of layer upon layer of dunes that one of the singular dunes could not tell alone. Now, a little tip for you, it can be helpful to close one eye when you're looking at a scene. You may forget that as humans, with two eyes, we see in 3 dimensions. And the differences in our eyes help us to understand depth, but a photograph is purely 2-dimensional. It's completely flat. So try closing one eye to take away your sense of depth so that you only see in 2 dimensions. Here's another smaller example of layers in dunes. Not only do we have layers of sand, but layers of light as well. The transitions between shadows and light give this another level of layering. So texture is another element to keep your eyes open for. I wasn't thinking about photographing sand here. I was thinking about showing the texture of the sand, and I used black and white to really accentuate this. Now in this image, the subject was the texture in the clouds. I again used black and white to showcase the texture. When you remove color, you're forced to just focus on the elements in the image. I also darkened the hillside significantly to draw attention away from it and keep it focused where it matters, which was that cloud texture. Now for this image, I intentionally desaturated the colors by making it high key to bring more attention to the texture. The colors were really overwhelming, and it took away from the important piece of the image, which I felt was that texture. Lack of texture can also be the subject. So here we have some fog over Yellowstone Lake, which removed nearly all the texture from this scene. So I was left with only the basic elements, which created this minimalist, almost Zen-like photograph. Now, photographers tend to be very technically minded for a large part. We love our gear and we love to create technically perfect images, but I would encourage you to take a break from this mentality. Again, stop thinking of a literal subject. Abstract images take this to another level. You often can't even identify the subject unless you are intimately familiar. So this is a reflection of aspen trees in a lake, but it looks more like an impressionistic painting. It can be useful to use your telephoto to isolate subjects and render them indistinguishable from the surrounding landscape. Create images that inspire the viewer to question, what the heck is that? Is it a deep sky image, a bacterial mat, or is that even a painting? This is actually more natural oils that I took with a macro, but very few people would know that, and it's not what's important. So this painterly image was created by shooting through the window of a truck during a rainstorm. Some would call it laziness, but I'll call it creativity. The rain was heavy and just pouring down the window, which completely blurred out the details, leaving only the features behind. I also placed the focus on the water to further blur the trees and make the image about abstractness, and the interpretation can be left up to the viewer. Most photographers would have waited for the storm to clear because it was just raining buckets. But by being open to seeing all the possibilities, I was able to notice this moment and capture it. I had my camera out and ready despite the terrible conditions, and it paid off. And here's some more oils in the desert that appear to me like nebula. This was a tiny patch that required my macro with extension tubes to photograph. So macro photography requires a whole other level of observation to notice these incredibly minute details. And I believe this was about a ½ an inch across. So slowing down helps you to tell the narrative of the landscape. This canyon is complete visual overload. You're surrounded by visual elements. It's hard to find one area to focus on, but by putting the literal aside and focusing on what else a scene could be, I was able to distill it down. To me, this tells a story of a family of trees in a canyon with the patriarchs in the center, surrounded by the younger up-and-coming family members. In here, some fallen leaves are locked in ice after a cold fall night, signaling the change from fall to winter. And I kept the color palette on the cool side to demonstrate the frigid feeling, really harsh and unforgiving. Yet it tells a story of constant renewal, despite the harshness of the seasons, as new leaves will once again grow next year and life reemerges. We may all feel a bit like this right now, kind of frozen in place, almost lifeless. And it's a reminder that there is always renewal and that life will once again go on, and we shall get back to normal one day and revive ourselves, hopefully very soon. Now, on this night, I was on a mission to photograph some ephemeral mud patterns, and I could have easily become too focused on the mud and never created this image, as it was easy to walk by on the way to our goal. But thankfully, I kept my mind open as we were wandering around, and I was able to notice this pattern, which ended up being my favorite from that night. Now, for many years, I was hyper-focused on the grand scenic, getting that perfect shot with amazing foreground and epic skies. And guess what? I was disappointed 95% of the time. I started to dislike landscape photography because the conditions rarely worked out. I wasn't open to seeing anything else except for that perfect grand scene, so I often walked away empty-handed. But now when I go out, I set zero expectations for what I want to get photographically. My first priority is to get out and enjoy nature. And if I come back with an image, great. If not, I'm okay with that, and there's always next time. So when you have expectations, it shuts you down to seeing anything else. On this night, I was open to seeing all possibilities. I had no intention of creating this image. I came with an open mind and was able to see something new that I had not noticed before. If I were focused on creating something else, I would have missed this. Now, this image required another level of slowing down. This was taken in Upper Antelope Canyon, and for anyone that has been there in the past 10 years, you know how crazy it is. Below the frame here is a group of at least 30 photographers fighting for position in a really small area, all to get the exact same shot that the Navajo guide has pointed out to them. And I couldn't bear taking that photo. I instead moved back as far as I could from the group, and I pointed my lens up. I let go of expectations of getting the shot and instead looked for something unique to me. I promise you, you won't burst into flames if you do not take the shot that everyone else does. I have never kicked myself for not taking the iconic shot. Now, at some point, you've probably been told that you need to follow the rules of composition. I would beg you to forget the rules. Rules, or even guidelines, suggest that you can't or shouldn't do something. Don't center your subject. Don't shoot in the shade or overcast light. Don't photograph a subject unless they are odd numbers. Always follow the rule of thirds. No, 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 no. Break the rules. When we talk about composition, it should be referred to as composition ideas. They're just that, ideas. And as Edward Weston said, when subject matter is forced to fit into preconceived patterns, there can be no freshness of vision. Following the rules of composition can only lead to a tedious repetition of pictorial cliches. So if you're looking to create meaningful, expressive work, then you must realize that there are no rules, and trying to apply rules limits your creativity. Painting by numbers is not art, nor is photographing by rules of composition. It's great to fill your head with ideas about composition beforehand, but don't go out into the field and actively look for these and try to fit a photograph into a nice little analytical template. It might cause you to not take a photo that you absolutely love because it doesn't follow the rules. How many great artists can you think of who became great by following the rules? Very few. I would encourage you to be weird. So here I was open to exploration. The sun was starting to get too high in the sky to photograph the trees and ferns from a normal angle, as it was just getting too harsh. So I got down on the ground to look up through the ferns instead to get the backlit leaves. I didn't resign myself to the harsh light. I instead embraced it and opened my mind to seeing the landscape in new ways. Here we had found some interesting foam bubbles in a canyon in Zion National Park that were creating these really interesting patterns. And I knew based upon past experience that I may be able to get the canyon wall reflecting in the water if I found just the right angle. So I explored all around the puddle, looking from up high and getting down on my knees to see down low. And I eventually found a really awkward spot to set up my tripod pressed against the canyon wall with my tripod in the water. It's something that you would never see just walking by. It took time to explore and find just the right angle. And I'd urge you to do the same. Be curious of your surroundings. See what happens when you look at something from a different perspective. Get down super low or get up really high and try shooting straight down. You might be surprised at what you find. So this is an image I took of a classic iconic scene in Colorado. It's quite beautiful, right? But is this image personally meaningful to me? No, it's really not. I was there with 50 of my closest friends, and I just got lucky with exceptionally good weather conditions. The other people there that night have nearly the exact same photo. This image is not special because of my artistic vision. I was simply at the right place at the right time. Now, don't get me wrong, I love this image and I actually have it hanging up, but it's not a personal expression. What if instead we focus on the small details around us? It's highly unlikely that anyone else photographed this scene. This image to me is much more meaningful because I put myself into it and created something unique. The last image is obvious beauty. It's where everyone goes to create the same photo. This image, on the other hand, is a personal expression. To me, it speaks of life and death and new beginnings. Now, this image is a great example of noticing details in the seemingly mundane. I found these patterns in a storm sewer draining into the ocean after a rainstorm. And who knows what kind of toxins I was standing in, but I just couldn't help myself. There was light reflecting off a rusty storm drain behind this, which created the color contrast between cool and warm. And then the sediment created flame-like patterns that may never be recreated. Now, most photographers would have been focused on the landscape in the other direction. While this is a well-composed image with many dynamic elements, I personally find this less meaningful than the sewer drain. There's something special about noticing the small details that I find creatively satisfying. It's personal and intimate that better expresses how I felt about the scene rather than simply showing the obvious beauty of a sunset at the beach. Now, I love this image. It's so dramatic and stunning, but it's mainly eye candy. Does it say anything about me as a photographer other than I went to a cool location under amazing conditions and made a decent composition? No, it's just fun and beautiful, and any halfway decent photographer standing next to me would see and photograph the exact same thing. It's obvious. Now, I still enjoy capturing images like this, but it doesn't showcase my creativity as an artist. It expresses my dedication to photography to get out there even in brutal conditions, but that's about it. This image, on the other hand, taken from the same spot with a telephoto, is personal and meaningful. It's quiet, subtle, and makes you think and ponder. It's simple and expressive that tells a story. This is a moment I was able to capture because I was open to seeing something different. I was using that part of my brain that is hidden to most. Some would say my soul or my muse, whatever you call it. This is an expression of myself, not just of the beautiful landscape. And I have some other random ideas to help you be creative. First off, you don't need to travel the world to create meaningful photos, which is good because that's kind of hard to do right now. But if your mind and eyes are open to seeing the beauty around you, you can create art anywhere you are. We love to travel and explore new locations, but as we have become more engrossed in a slower style of photography, we find ourselves spending more time in certain locations we connect with rather than trying to see as much as possible. So go photograph in your backyard, your neighborhood, or the park down the street. Beauty can be found anywhere if you are open to seeing it. And another important thing I want to encourage you to do is get to know your camera intimately. You should know as much as possible about the tool that lets you create before you ever get into the field. Now, this doesn't mean you need to know every single setting because today's cameras are absurdly complex and overwhelming, but you should know how to change all of your major settings without having to think about it. You should know how to change your aperture, ISO, shutter speed without even looking at your camera. So you can practice in a dark closet so that you can't see what you're doing. And the camera should really be an extension of you, not a roadblock. As soon as you have to stop and think, how do I do this again? Then you're in trouble. Now that prefrontal cortex is engaged and your creativity slows down. When I'm in the field, I'm in a flow state. I rarely think about my settings. I immediately know what to do and how to do it. And some of this comes from experience, but it also comes from practice and dedication to knowing everything about my camera. And also it helps that I don't change camera systems every year. And another quote, thinking should be done beforehand and afterwards, never while actually taking a photograph. So once you have the primary elements down, then I would encourage you to learn the features that make photographing easier. If you have focus stacking in camera, try using it, or maybe it's focus peaking or even just exposure compensation. Learn live view or touch to focus on your LCD. Maybe set up some custom buttons for features that you use often so you don't have to dig through menus. Anything that'll ensure that you capture that flash of perception when you see it. Try to break down all the barriers that slow you down in the field so you don't have to think about anything technical. You're just creating. And a note about creativity, everyone is born with it. It comes more naturally for some, seemingly without effort, which can be really frustrating if it doesn't for you. This doesn't mean that it's not inside of you. I've had to work at it, and you can too. Now, through this practice, you'll begin to access the part of your mind, your psyche, your soul, your muse that is hidden by a constant bombardment of your thoughts and emotions. So with that said, I have a challenge for you all. Get outside tomorrow. Try to clear your mind, close your eyes, and make yourself aware of your surroundings, the sounds, the smells, and be present in the current moment. Not thinking about what you're going to have for dinner or all the tasks that you need to get done tomorrow. Just be there. Then wander around, but don't look for anything specific. Think about being open to seeing shapes, patterns, lines, colors, really distilling it down to the basic elements. And when you see something that catches your eye, don't think about it. Just take a quick photograph. It can be useful to even put your camera in full auto mode for this exercise. Doing this trains your mind to be open to a flash of perception. And when your mind is open, it will notice these things naturally. And over time, you'll notice them more and more, which is your creativity coming to life. So if anyone wants to do this assignment, you might want to take a screenshot or something of this, or just take a photo with your iPhone or something. So no thoughts or worries, just wander, open yourself up to noticing things that catch your attention, immediately photograph that thing which caught your attention, and you're not trying to make a great photograph. Just take a snapshot of what caught your attention and move on. And don't worry about composition or settings. You might even want to do this with your camera phone, just so you don't even have to think about anything. You're just taking that quick little photo. So with that, I want to thank you all. And again, if you want to find us at exploringexposure.com, we have a 25% off of our post-processing videos. You can use that code, which I failed to update. That was for the last club I did, but that one will work, or the initials for your club work as well. And then if you want to sign up for a trial of the Nature Photographers Network, that's naturephotographers.network. So with that, I'd like to open it up to any questions. Please don't be shy.
Okay, thank you. I'm going outside tomorrow with an open mind.
Awesome.
I'm gonna try that assignment. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
Yes. So we're going to open it up for questions. Kent, do you want to start with yours that you submitted in the chat, and then we'll go from there? Kent?
Yeah, okay. I was wondering, what percentage of shots do you take on a tripod?
I personally take probably 90%. I tried to avoid the tripod for a long time because it can be really cumbersome. But if you want to create really great photographs with a lot of detail and really sharp, then it's really important to use that tripod. So I kind of, I don't know, just forced myself to do it over the years and got used to using it, and also got a much better tripod that's much easier to use, because they can be a pain in the butt. I appreciate that. So
Anybody else? Questions?
So what tripod did you get that was easier to use?
my primary one that I use is from it's a newer company called the Colorado Tripod Company. They're starting to develop some more. They just have one available right now, but it's a really high quality tripod that is, I would say, even higher quality than like Gitzo or Really Right Stuff, but it's like half the price. So I just love it, and I've been using that for quite a while now.
David, what lenses did you use for those photographs?
A huge variety. I shoot with Fujifilm myself, so they're pretty much all Fujifilm lenses, but a range from ultra wide to extreme telephoto up to like 800 millimeters, and even with macros. It really depends on the subject, and I experiment with all different types of focal lengths.
Do you develop your own color film then?
No, it's digital.
Oh.
Do you have any contemplative photographers that you sort of saw as mentors? Like, I've seen a lot of Thomas Merton's photography, and to me, I can just look at it and it changes my eye.
Yeah.
And I noticed the same thing happened during your talk. I went over to get something in the kitchen, and all of a sudden I saw like this pattern of the chair reflection on the wood floor. And
I don't know if anyone particularly influenced me. I did go through kind of this program online back in the day for studying contemplative photography. That's not around anymore, so I'm working on creating my own kind of email series of helping you to learn contemplative photography in that way with projects and stuff.
David, how much post-processing do you do for your images?
I kind of went through different phases. I used to be like really heavy into Photoshop and doing all sorts of different things, but I've since kind of taken a different approach, and I've pretty much do like 95% of my work in Lightroom, and I take a pretty simple approach. I have some videos on my site that go over my whole approach. I use a lot of the tone curve in Lightroom, which is not a terribly common thing to do, which helps focus on the midtones. And I feel like I can get really nice results by just using the midtones in the image. So I do that, and I also do a lot of local adjustments. So I do a lot of burning and dodging in Lightroom, and to really focus the attention where I want it. So it's simple, but has a lot to it at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Back to the lens question, are you using zooms or primes?
I really just use zooms.
David, the picture you showed are really so personal and gentle and emotional. They're really inspiring, and thank you for it.
No, thank you.
So I have a couple of questions to try and get down to your philosophy, because this was really refreshing. Thank you for giving the presentation.
You're welcome.
So just, do you have a favorite photographer? Or, I mean, I saw that you were showing pictures of Salvador Dali, and and do you go to inspiration of other photographic or non-photographic arts to try and amp up your creative vision?
Yeah, I would say I only have a handful of photographers that really inspire me. Ones that come to mind, like Michael Kenna. I'm going to draw a total blank right now. My friend Cole Thompson, he has wonderful work. But yeah, I used to follow all the photographers who were really popular on social media, and I'm not inspired by them anymore. Just because I've been through the process, I know what's involved now, and I just have a different approach. So I focus on those photographers that inspire me, and also, other artists. I love like Albert Bierstadt, Thomas Moran, all those classical painters. But yeah, I find more inspiration in other artists rather than photography so much.
So then a follow-up question is, if you are inspired in a certain way, but you can't necessarily pull the image when you're there on site, have you ever used kind of creative photography techniques afterwards for layering and opacity and just putting something together to create a creative image afterwards that represents your time that day?
I don't think I really have that much. I definitely do want to experiment with it more. I came across some techniques recently that I want to try out. Blanking on the name of what it is, but basically like taking photos around a subject, multiple photos from different angles, and then combining those together and create some really interesting painterly effects. And I think it'd be fun to try, but it's not something I've done a whole lot myself, other than just doing like intentional camera movement and things like that.
Great.
But I love experimenting with different things and to help create the vision that I want.
Do you do only landscape in nature?
Yeah, that's my focus.
Do you ever try to put the human element into the landscape?
Not so much. To me, it's I don't know, it's just about nature itself for me, and I tend to gravitate away from those.
Anybody else? More questions?
I think it is what you mentioned. It's important to know your camera really well. And I think the fact that the cameras come out with so many different things on them really it makes it difficult for me anyway, because it just seems like there's always something that's in my way of taking the photo.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like the reason that I picked my particular camera is because it wasn't about the megapixels or any of the technical stuff. It was just, I found that I really enjoyed using it. I found it really easy to use, and I can just do everything really quickly, and it feels really intuitive, and I just have fun using it. So that was my criteria for picking my camera.
Is there a Fujifilm camera that you find is more intuitive and just simple than others?
I have the X-T3, which is a great camera. I know like the X Pro 3 is kind of interesting because it's might challenge you a little bit more creatively because it's so simple and dumbed down, and it has a screen that hides away, so you can't even review your image unless you really are looking to do that. So I've actually been wanting to get that to even push myself a little bit further and not be able to review images right away.
The electronic viewfinder, at least sometimes it can kind of keep you more present, I think, at least, before you push the button.
Yeah, I really like the electronic viewfinder rather than looking through the lens. I know most people are kind of the opposite, but I like seeing, that's what I'm going to get. It kind of takes me a little bit more out of reality and into the finished image. So I actually like the electronic viewfinder a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, here's another random question to get inside your head. What you travel around, right? 5 years you've been in a trailer. Do you have a favorite national park or spot in the country, or do you just stay in the US or do you go all over?
So my favorite national park is probably Death Valley. And most people think of it as really bleak landscaped, but it's really incredible once you start exploring it. It's so interesting because there's just so many variety of subjects to photograph. And we've been going there every winter for the past 5-6 years and spending several months there. And every year we come back and we find new things, and it's just an incredible place. And after that is probably might be Yellowstone. Jennifer has forced me to love that because I didn't really connect with it initially, but she is absolutely in love with it. So I was forced to spend a lot of time there, and I'm really thankful for that because now I see it in a totally different way. And I don't think I showed many images from there tonight, but I have a whole portfolio of different images from Yellowstone. And yeah, we primarily are in the US. I've traveled a bit to Iceland and New Zealand, but haven't done much lately.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
You and your partner go to the same locations and you're both photographers. How different is your photography? Is something slightly different? I mean, you're looking at the same things.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. We'll go to the same location and see completely different things. Sometimes we see the same thing and we end up taking pretty much the same photo, but for the most part, we see totally different things. And even with our workshops as well, we take a group of people out to a location and we encourage them to wander around and find their own thing. And it's really cool to see what everyone comes back with because everyone's vision is so different and the photos are just completely different from the exact same location. So it's really fun to see that and see things that I totally miss and I'm jealous of.
David, after you sent me the link to her website, I went on it, And I see that she's been very involved in what's called slow photography.
Right.
Is that similar to what contemplative photography is?
Yeah, it is. It's fairly similar. It's just the idea of slowing down and paying attention to what's around you. So that, yeah, it's very similar concept.
Mm-hmm.
Why would, sorry, go ahead,
I was
Sandy.
just going to say, I see she's like a founding member of a movement. And so
Right.
it piqued my interest. So I was going to look more into that. So,
Yeah.
Why do you call it contemplative versus mindful photography?
It could easily be called either one. I think just contemplative is what's traditionally was what it's been called, but it could definitely be called mindful photography as well.
David, could you tell us the name of the tripod company again? I missed it.
Oh yeah, it's just the Colorado Tripod Company.
Thank you.
Yeah. They're kind of struggling with supply issues right now, but hopefully they get back online soon. I think COVID's had a bit of a hit on them.
so any more?
Wonderful.
I hear somebody.
It was most enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just,
Yeah, it was
I
cool.
just
Thank
want to
you.
say how wonderful this was and how inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you,
No,
David.
thank you. That's good to hear. You never know with these Zoom meetings. You can't tell.
I know.
Yeah, a lot of
This is
people are
great.
going thumbs up. Yeah.
Good. Yes, awesome.
So glad to see you.
Wonderful.
Chris just gave you a heart.
Okay, so David, thank you so much. This was just a special event, and I was so glad to invite you, and you accepted. And
Yeah, thank you, Sandy.
I've learned so much, and it's really got me thinking. So
Awesome.
yeah, I appreciate it. It looks like everybody else is appreciative. So
Great.
We're just all mellow now. Thanks. We're like all zen now. So thanks for closing out our
in
Thursday.
the chat, there's a lot of enjoyable things. A lot. Oh my goodness. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who joined us, to the Baltimore Camera Club, and whoever joined us from MPA. And Wendy, nice to see you. Good, you came
Nice
in.
to see you,
Yeah.
Sandy.
Okay.
This was great.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, David.
Yeah, David, thank you so much. Seriously.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Very good.
Okay. Yeah, what was interesting is that we didn't get a lot of questions during the presentation. You were right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And it's the subject matter.
Yeah.
I think everybody was really thinking about what you were talking about. So
Yeah, I'm glad we got through the technical issues.
I don't know what that was.
Yeah, that was strange.
Yeah, but that's what we're running into. That's today. We're so dependent upon it, and you just never know.
Yep.
So, so say hi to Jennifer for me,
Okay.
and tell her that I'm checking her out on her website.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to put up a message in the Camera Club Hub.
Okay, cool. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay, you guys, nobody's leaving, so I'm going to end it. Okay. Hey, David.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.